So I've been looking at this question of the age and size of the universe, and it's very interesting because I know I've been out there in the past trying to understand. So, how big is the universe? And what's on the edge of it, if there is an edge or not. And it took me a while to figure out something which I think it's not intuitive, so I thought I'd share it. Maybe other people are wondering about this, or maybe nobody wonders about it. I don't know. But it seems like there aren't really clear... if you go out and search how big is the universe, or where are we in the universe? We have supposedly maps of the universe. Maybe you've seen them. They have these, little lights everywhere, and they're galaxies, and there's empty spaces and full spaces. And so you think, well, we must be in there somewhere. Where are we in that? Well, it turns out we're always in the middle of it, because obviously it's what we can see from us. So we're always going to be in the middle of it. So, but still, it's just what's on the edge of it? Where, it doesn't make any sense. It's all kind of vague. And so I was actually doing some research, and I finally realized that one of the issues is that we actually don't know how big the universe is, because there's an issue of information, right? So basically, we only know information about things that have emitted light, such that light has arrived to us, right? But as we all know, I suppose the universe is expanding in all directions. So that means that as light has gone out to us, the objects have moved farther out. And so you can imagine a moment at which those objects that keep moving farther out are going to fade away. Their light is they're going to be so far away that the light that reaches them, that goes out from them, will never reach us, no matter how long it travels, because the universe is also expanding at the same time as the light is coming our way. And to be clear, when I say the universe is expanding, it's not just the objects, but it's actually space itself. So that means that with every moment that goes past, that light that is reaching us has to traverse more space to get to us. And since that is continually expanding and is not going to stop expanding, then you can see how there are objects that we now see, which in the future we will not be able to see. Now, that's kind of interesting, and that's called the particle horizon. And what it means is it's the place at which light emitted by an object will never reach us. That's the particle horizon, okay? So the point is that we don't know what's beyond that particle horizon. We don't know what's out there whose light, the light of which will never reach us, which I think is very trippy. So it's a little bit like being on a raft in an ocean, right? And you can see, I forget what it is, it's a few miles. I mean, it depends on how high you are, but if you're saying you're in a raft, you can see a few miles all around you, right? And you say, oh, well, that's the entire ocean, maybe. I don't know, you wouldn't say that, but, let's say you grew up on an island. Maybe that's a better analogy. It has a little hill on it, and so you go up and you observe that there's water everywhere, and so you might can come to the conclusion, why not? That's all there is. That's the universe. But of course, it's possible that beyond that horizon, there's much more water. And of course, if you were out in the middle of the Pacific, it turns out that there would be a whole lot of water and a whole lot of space that you just didn't know about, but it was still there. Now, there isn't any reason to think there isn't more universe out there, right? So the idea is probably there's a lot more of the same. But I just think it's so interesting that that's an actual limit on human knowledge. we just can't know. And it's not conceivable that we would ever know, because to even get to the limits of that horizon is billions of light years of travel, right? So we basically can't get there, barring some amazing, technological invention or some super intelligent agent that says, oh yeah, I can take you there. And we can take pictures of that. Now, here's another interesting little tidbit, which is kind of unrelated, but I think it's interesting. Implication of this particle horizon is that if you went back, say 5 billion years ago, and you looked up at the night sky, well, the night sky wouldn't, you have to have a telescope with you. You looked up in a telescope and looked at galaxies, not at stars, but at galaxies, you would see more galaxies than are visible today. So I think that's kind of interesting. But you wouldn't see necessarily more stars, except that, stars come and go. But because the stars in our galaxy aren't expanding away from us, they're in orbit around the galaxy. So the whole expansion thing only applies to distant objects, and not even all objects. Like, for example, Andromeda, which is the closest big galaxy to us, that actually is not going away from us either. So it's like distant galaxies that show us most clearly that the universe is expanding, and they're redshifted, right? Because that's what light does when it's emitted by an object that is going away from you. So the interesting point here is we're almost like in a here's one analogy, like we're in a hotel room and we only know that room. Or let's say if we open some doors, we can get into the rest of the floor, right? But we can never get out of the floor. Does that mean that our floor is the only floor? Well, probably not. There's hints that there's probably more out there, and likely our floor is just one of many floors, right? And I think at that point you have to be careful about the kind of assumptions that you're making about what's out there. And so it very well may be that there is a whole ton of universe out there, like it could even be infinite, like we just don't know. But it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to argue that the universe is about the size of what we can happen to see from our position. So that would be, returning to a kind of like, Ptolemaic view of the world. Well, we're at the middle. Well, of course, we're at the middle of the universe in the observational sense. Like, we are at the center of all that we can see, just like that guy on an island. If he gets up on a hill, he's in the middle of everything that he can see. Well, he might be tempted in like a sort of impressionistic way to draw a conclusion, which upon further thought makes no sense, that he is at the center of the world, right? But he's not. He's at the center of what he can see. And I think that, being at the center of what we can see can trick you. And I just wonder if this is behind some of the theological ideas that are out there, that, we're at the center of God's plan, or we're at the center, that we know everything about the universe that needs to be known. It really is just, we only observe everything we can observe. You know what I mean? Like, our brains are not made to factor in the things we don't know. And that's kind of like a by definition thing, right? On the other hand, though, you can sort of reasonably extrapolate from what we don't know, from what we do know to what we don't know, right? And so it's kind of like history, right? So history, there's another kind of horizon in history. Like, we study history based on what? Merely based on what has survived. Okay, I mean, unless it's recent history where there's actual eyewitnesses that you could consult. But let's go back, 1,000 years. There's no living memory of what happened 1,000 years ago. So we are merely and only constructing our view of what happened 1,000 years ago by the materials that survived. And in particular, materials that have writing on them. Those are the most important, I suppose, and then also archaeological remains, right? That's it. There's nothing more. But then, so that's what we know, right? But we can quite easily extrapolate that we only know a sliver of everything that was and happened 1,000 years ago. We just know a very tiny sliver, right? I'm sure many entire cities and perhaps even countries and civilizations that we don't even know about that happened, right? Certainly if you go farther back. This is a fascinating case in the case of prehistory, right? Because humans have probably been around as we are today, going back about 50,000 years, 50,000, 50. But history is only like 6 or 7,000 years old, right? In terms of like written down stuff. And so that's pretty interesting. Like this entire thousands and thousands of years that don't have any documentation, right? And we have some archaeological remains, and there is an outline of history, but it's quite vague. We don't really know much about the cultures and what people did and believed, how they lived, except for very scant remains for most of human history. I think that's just so fascinating. So same issue with the universe, right? The little information that we have is kind of like history in a sense that it points to there being a lot more of the same, right? But I think one of the things to be careful about in this whole scenario is the tendency to extrapolate from what we know, right? And so I think this is where like the whole idea of crafting a cosmological argument for the existence of God just kind of starts to feel silly, Look, I'm not necessarily even going to craft a counter argument. I'm just going to say, look, are you really doing this? Are you really saying, hey, since I can see everything that I can see in all directions, that allows me to make deductions about, where this all came from, when the likelihood is that the very thing you're looking at is massively, massively larger than we already think it is, which is massive. And that we're very likely just a small bubble in a larger thing. We don't know where it came from or where it's going or how long it's been around. I mean, we do know sort of generally like, I think it's 13.8 billion years. But my goodness, there's just so much out there we don't know. But tiny little humans on our grain of sand, we're like, oh yeah, but we know it came from God. And it's like that dude in the Bible. Like, it's just, I used to believe that, but now I just feel like that's actually one of the important reasons that I started questioning my entire faith was that very same thing. Just the awareness of how massive the universe is, not only in space, extent of space, but extent of time. And just go, man, like, I'm sorry, but the extrapolation from that to this God guy that was written about maybe 3,000 years ago at the most, it just feels silly,